Welcome to the Low Carb Athlete Podcast, where we focus on discussing topics to help you burn fat, optimize health, and improve performance in life and sports. Transform the whole you from the inside out with the holistic method. Let's dive in. Here's your host, Debbie Potts.
Hey, are you an aging athlete? Are you over 40 and struggling to get your desired results? I understand your frustrations. If you're like me, you're trying to get your running back or your cycling back or whatever sport you love to do, and you just can't figure out what's missing in your performance gains. How is your training and fueling program working for you? That's what I do. I personalize your nutrition and health program for you based on a bunch of different things. We collect data, collect clues from nutritional therapy assessment, from a food log with symptoms. Look at your genetics. If you've done something as DNA Fit, look at blood chemistry panels. Let's look at functional lab tests as a Vibrant Wellness wheat zoomer to test if you have leaky gut and sensitivity to wheat, peptides in foods. Look at food sensitivity labs. And Dutch tests, look at your hormones. So we look at all these hidden internal sources of chronic stress that may be impacting your ability to burn fat, improve performance, and longevity. So if you want to talk about how we can personalize your fueling, training, and performance plan, let me know. Set up a discovery call. Head to my website, debbiepotts.net, and reach out. Set up a call and we can chat about how I can help you be the best version of yourself. So you can stop blaming the aging process and instead change your mindset that you're embracing the change, that we train differently in our 40s and up versus what you did when you're 20, 30-year-old. We need to adjust how we eat, when we eat, why and how, but also match our nutrition with our exercise program and add some more health building lifestyle habits into our day. I call this all the holistic method comprehensive coaching program, where I work on individualizing clients' nutrition, exercise, stress reduction, sleep, movement, time outside, digestion and gut health, hydration, and my favorite, happiness, play, and laughter. So if you want to know more how you can be your best self, live your best life, and perform your best, head to debbiepotts.net, schedule a discovery call with me, and we can get started on your new health building journey. You can be that amazing athlete and stop blaming the aging process. Hey everyone, it's Debbie Potts, and I am talking about heat training today with Dr. Julia Casadio. And this might be a little late, you might think, because it's October. But what if you're training for a race in New Zealand in our winter time? Maybe you need to start planning this for next summer when you're training for races in a hot climate. So giving you a little heads up on some things you can do to learn how to adapt to heat stress. Why does Dr. Julia Casadio want to talk about heat training? Well, that is what she's got a background in. She's got a PhD in sports performance physiology. She's originally from Canada, my home country, where she grew up cross-country ski racing at a competitive level. But now she's in New Zealand with her husband and 2 children, with them enjoying kitesurfing, surfing, mountain biking, skiing. She's a senior physiologist at the high performance sport in New Zealand and has worked in the last decade with numerous Olympic medal winning sports. Her PhD looked at novel applications of heat training, which is why we're talking to her today, to enhance performance in elite athletes. She has led the New Zealand heat strategies for both the Rio and Tokyo Olympics. She continues her research interest through ongoing projects examining heat training, cooling strategies, how to optimize elite female athlete performance, and most recently, accelerating the return to performance in athletes suffering from long COVID. She's recently founded Impact Factor, which is an online consulting service using the art and science of physiology to optimize training, recovery, and performance strategies in high performance athletes. So her website's coming soon on that. But I will put everything on the show notes. So if you go to debbiepotts.net under podcast and look up this episode with Julia, and you'll learn lots more on her research. And today we're going to talk about heat training and a little bit more. She did give me her PDF form on her lab to real world paper on heat training, which has practical insights and considerations for the athlete, and a guide attached on the show notes. Hopefully we'll get it on there to how to acclimatize for heat using the FITT principle. So if I pull that up, I'm not showing this on video, but you can see a lot of what she's talking about, which sometimes I need a visual aid, but she has a great handout. You can email me, Low Carb Athlete, and find my email on the website, debbiepotts.net. But looking at heat acclimatization guidelines using FITT principle is frequency, intensity, time, and type. So on this handout, she'll talk about breaking up what we talked about today: consecutive days, increased body temperature at the start of a session as 10 minutes of pickups, and that's 30 to 90 minutes workout, and then a natural and hot, humid environment. 1 to 2 weeks. She talks about overall training sessions, easy, moderate, but first 2 days intensity can be increased over the intervention. Then talks about males adapt 4 to 7 days. Females, of course, we're different. We adapt in 8 to 12 days. So we always have to look at the research. That's why I want to talk to Julia, because women, as the term coined by Dr. Stacy Sims, women are not small men. So all the research studies that you look at, you want to make sure that the age and the gender on that research study, because typically they're on men, and not until recently there's not as many studies on females. But females adapt to heat 8 to 12 days. So take note of that. Men 4 to 7, females 8 to 12. And working on these cooling modalities, she talks a lot, Julia does, on slushies. And I've heard Stacy Sims talk about that. So slushies, we'll talk about what slushies are and how you can heat training with that. Maybe your passive heat training post workouts, doing a sauna or spa. And then thermal memory we'll talk about, and this is in her handout, faster reacclimation periods of time. Heat adds in during the heat in your training session, and how to get ready for event, travel, a race. So you got to look at timing everything. And so when you're doing your training schedule for a race that's in a hot, humid climate, and maybe it's cold where you live, how do you prepare for that? So I was hoping to get this out in time for Ironman Hawaii, but it's just a week after Ironman Hawaii as this comes out. And you would be preparing for getting ready for Ironman Hawaii weather if you're racing there the 2 to 4 weeks beforehand. So we want to have heat adaptation and know your increase in body temperature, sweat rate. We have to get to know all this information, and looking at your female hormone cycle is important as well to tie it all together. So Dr. Julia has great information. Look at our show notes. I will get all this in there, and hopefully you'll pick up something new to help you for your next race that's in hot environment. Enjoy the show. Hey everyone, it's Debbie, and wow, you're close up with me on the YouTube channel, Low Carb Athlete. If you're watching me, I am going to talk to another expert in endurance athletes, and she's in New Zealand. So we're going to record in a little bit, and I want to talk to you about heat training and heat acclimatization as we are getting up to Ironman Hawaii. And we know that one of the challenges in Ironman Hawaii, as I qualified 5 times for Ironman Hawaii and have done Lava Man and Honu, I know it's hot. And how do you prepare for a race that's in hot, humid conditions and also windy in Kona? How do you get your body ready for that? So I want to talk to Julia, our guest today on the show, about female athletes versus male athletes in the heat. First, I want to go over some research studies as I've been reading Dr. Stacy Sims' book, new book out, and then I've gone back to read her book, Roar, again. And I've done the Endure IQ Dr. Dan Plu's workout modules, and they talk on one section of the program that I did on female athletes on the effects of training and physiological and psychological changes based on your hormone cycle, and then how to train your workout. But Julia actually wrote the section in the Endure IQ program on LDT 103 module on heat training. So we're going to talk to her about that section of the program and how we can apply that to us endurance athletes, male and female. And then I actually have been experimenting a lot with my own training and paying attention to my performance different times of my cycle, and noticing how my husband can just be kind of the same all the time. His training just always feels good on the long run. And then half the time I'm good, not so good. So, you'll notice in the female cycle that are premenopausal and perimenopausal that our body temperature changes. So just looking at my chart, and if you do a new client special assessment with me, I give my clients my mapping the cycle chart and my new ebook. But the body temperature as a hormones level drop at the beginning of your cycle, follicular cycle, body temperature decreases. Body temperature is cooler the first half of our cycle. So say week or day 1 to day 14, then ovulation. Then after ovulation, our temperature is warmer during the second half of the cycle. Progesterone raises our basal body temperature in the luteal phase. And luteal phase is which we begins after ovulation. And so you'll see changes in your heart rate variability, also resting heart rate, insulin, and I found that glucose levels change too. So kind of fun to track your own cycle and biometrics if you're using Aura or Whoop, if you're doing a CGM as NutriSense or levels, and looking at maybe the breath test with your BioSense or Lumen, and then heart rate variability. Super interesting. You have a higher HRV in the beginning of your cycle. That means you're more parasympathetic. Follicular state, day 1 to 14 until ovulation, you're more parasympathetic. When you are getting post-ovulation, end of your cycle, you have lower heart rate variability in the luteal phase. And luteal, means more sympathetic. So that is why we need more nurturing, as Dr. Mindy Pelz calls the luteal phase as more your nurturing phase. Progesterone wants cortisol down low. And so for more sympathetic fight or flight, we need more calming, shifting our body back down to be more parasympathetic. So that's why when we do our training schedule, the luteal phase towards the end of your cycle before you restart to day 1, you want to do a lighter week and just really drop everything 75%, but you don't want to get too much stressors in your life. So then we'll talk to Julia today about where does heat come in this cycle. So Dr. Stacy Sims has an article, Women's Specific Strategies to Train and Compete in the Heat. And the article, I can put in the show notes, says that women have different needs than men when it comes to training, competing in the heat. So one research study shows that both sexes see their core temperature rise when they get dehydrated during exercise. Women's core may get hotter at a lower dehydration level because they start out with lower volume of body water than men do and have a more rapid rise in core temperature in the early stages of exercise. Men also have a higher overall sweating capacity, which appears to be an advantage in hot and dry conditions where sweat evaporates and helps you cool quickly, but as a disadvantage in hot, humid conditions where they end up what's called wasted sweating, where you are pouring sweat, but it's not evaporating or cooling you. Women have and use more sweat glands, but generally sweat less and waste less sweat and are better equipped to tolerate hot and humid conditions. So this is drstacysims.com website on her blog. You can read about this. Now, women as I was just saying and experienced yesterday on my attempt to do a long run, it was crappy because of the heat, the humidity, and I was day 28. Sex hormones matter. In the luteal phase of your cycle, especially when hormones are the highest the week or so before your cycle, your core temperature is slightly elevated. So you start sweating later after starting exercise, and your blood plasma volume is reduced up to 8%. Now, this holds true for the active weeks of people on contraceptive pills. That means that your tolerance for heat is lower, and you will really need to be on your game when it comes to staying hydrated and being sure you're fully acclimated going into the workout. So managing hot conditions, Stacy Sims says, can be harder for women peri and post-menopause because low estrogen can blunt your normal cooling responses during exercises, as well as blunt your thirst sensation and sweat rates. Typically, your blood vessels expand as you warm up, sending blood closer to the skin for cooling. With this response dampened, as we have less estrogen, more heat is trapped in your core. So you feel like you're burning up and need to slow down when you want to start going hard in your workout session. Your body's thermostat is also more likely to overreact to changes in the temperature because your sex hormones aren't there to regulate it, which means you may be more susceptible to hot flashes too. So what do you do about it? Well, we'll talk about that in the show today. But some tips Dr. Stacy Sims has in this article, I'm not sure what year this is, but we'll talk to Julia about this as well. Applying the sauna protocol. Head to a hot place like a sauna 25 to 30 minutes after a workout or the end of the day when you're already a little dehydrated or wearing more layers. So when I used to train for Ironman Hawaii and I was living in Seattle and the race is October, the weather would start to change in Seattle. So I would do a lot more layers and just be hot. And then I used to have a sauna before we moved to San Diego. I had to sell it because it was so hard to move with, but I would do a sauna nowadays. So you want to heat training is one part. So we'll talk about that 5 to 10 minute primer of heat exposure. So go in the sauna, heat up, and then go for 5 to 10 minutes before you start your actual workout session. Women and peri and postmenopausal, this primer, Stacy Sims says, is needed because of a slower response to heat. So if you're in high hormone phase, which is the luteal phase, your body's already shifted to a higher thermoregulatory threshold and no primer is needed. So hydration is key, but as we say with Rob Wolf's element, that you don't sweat out water, we sweat out minerals. So we want to make sure we're taking in enough and preloading before that workout, which I did not do enough of yesterday, Sunday morning, and Saturday night. We had a party here for the podcast and I was running around and I kept I was just drinking seltzer water and kept not drinking or eating. So it wasn't so great before a workout on Sunday in the heat. So we want to preload hydration. We'll talk about that. What is the right amount of sodium? And everyone's kind of different. I think, Rob Wolf also talks about this, but eating more salty foods the day before, like olives, sardines, anchovies, pickles, pickle juice post-workouts, always amazing. Or you can take it during a workout. So lots of things here. Strategies to perform and compete in the heat is also on Dr. Stacy Sims' blog. And this article, again, I'll have them put in the show notes, but women specific strategies to train and compete in the heat. And this is actually June 20th, 2022. So not too long ago, just a couple months ago. So wearing more layers, doing a sauna protocol, preload hydration, be careful with hyponatremia, and everyone's a little bit different. So testing, not guessing. Some other things she talks about: strategies to perform and compete in the heat, keeping your cool temperature, cold core. Don't exercise hard, get into the sauna, hang around in the heat. Don't do anything to drive your core temperature up in the 24 hours before the event. Take a dip, pre-cool your body, possible immersing yourself in cold water for 10 to 15 minutes. take a dip in a body of water or take a cold shower. And that will help drop your skin and core temperature so you're nice and cool to start. I jumped in the pool here at my neighbor's house when I got home from my run yesterday because I was still hot. Drink a slushie. Another option is drinking an icy beverage to lower your core temperature and create a heat sink so you're storing less heat and store it more slowly. This will help you tolerate high core temperature during exertion and push back onset of heat-induced fatigue and cooling your skin. And beta-alanine. So the other tips on there too would be interesting to dive into. So let's talk to Julia and see what research she has done. I'm going to push pause and we'll be back in a moment. Okay, we have Julia Casadio. Is that how you say your last name right? I forgot to ask. Yeah. I'm easy Potts, or my maiden name was Smith, so I can't get that wrong. So Julia, your background is almost as nice as my background. You're in New Zealand, right? Where you are? You got a nice balcony of trees. You must be high up.
In New Zealand. Yeah, North Island.
But you're Canadian. We were chatting. So Canadian living in New Zealand. So how long have you lived in New Zealand?
I've been here for 9.5 years.
Wow.
And before that, I was in Perth, Australia for 5 years. So I've been overseas for a little bit now.
Does that feel too far away from like North America? It's such a forever long flight.
It did from Perth because you always had to have at least 2 flights to get back in Canada. Whereas like Auckland to Vancouver is 1 flight without COVID complications. So that doesn't seem too bad. But no, it is a ways away.
Yeah, I know a friend who's from Canada who's in my in Australia or New Zealand, but he was in my fitness mastermind and he was living, his wife or girlfriend was Australian, and they'd be coming back over to California all the time for conferences and Idea Fitness Convention. And it's like, that is the longest commute back and forth like a few times a year. So anyways, we are not here to talk about our differences in commuting. We're here to talk about heat, training in the heat, racing in the heat, and what we can do to acclimate for the heat when we are an endurance athlete. And I love lately, as we were just chatting about female athletes versus male athletes, and then break the female athlete down into premenopausal, perimenopausal, menopausal, postmenopausal is something I've been trying to research more. But I know your study is more the heat training for, you work with Olympic athletes, so a little younger, but what's the biggest reason that you focused your studies, your research in heat training?
So I came over here to work with the New Zealand Olympic team, and I also did my research for my PhD looking at the heat, and it was specifically during the Rio Olympic cycle for 2016, which wasn't going to be overly hot, but did have some hot days. But we were doing that research with our sports for the Tokyo Games that were meant to be in 2020, but we're in 2021, because those were going to be the most hot and humid games in the history of the Summer Games. So for New Zealand sport, we are always coming from our winter to compete in pinnacle events, and usually they're in the Northern Hemisphere. So there's always this element of the athletes here needing to adapt. They're not getting the natural heat acclimation from being at home during that time of year. So that was why it was kind of a big push for that so early out. And yeah, I guess when you work in elite sport, I hope it's okay that it just started storming here.
Oh, no, it's okay. I can't hear it.
You still hear it. Okay. So now I've lost my train of thought.
With the elite athletes.
Yeah, with elite sport, you can't always just, as an academic, you can't always just ask whatever questions you want and get buy-in from the coaches and the sport and the athletes that, okay, this is what we're going to do a research study on. Like there needs to be an element of buy-in from them. And often the best way to do that is come to them with, okay, what are your questions? What are your concerns about your athletes and their ability to perform in the heat or be prepared to perform in the heat? And so for my PhD, that's really how my research questions were formed. So a little bit unconventional.
You have a lot of rain behind you.
You can hear it now.
No, I can't hear anything. I'm just looking at oh my gosh, that looks like what we had Friday over here. But yeah, I think, so heat training, I think, is so important. Yeah, I'm sure it's complicated, especially in New Zealand. Like you're in winter in opposite seasons when you're training for races. But we were just chatting that Ironman Hawaii is coming up, and I'll put this out this beginning of October. So, say you have 2 weeks before Ironman Hawaii. What do athletes, if you're doing endurance events, is it different to heat train, acclimatize to heat versus a short distance sprint? I mean, what if it's like a 10-hour event versus 10 minutes?
Yeah. So for endurance sports, the recommendation is that you do a lot more heat training than, say, if you're a team sport or, a sprint endurance athlete, like, say, rowing in the Olympics. So for Ironman, you want a minimum of 2 weeks of heat acclimation or acclimatization. So acclimatization means training in a natural environment. So say you're actually in Kona or you're in San Diego and it's nice and hot and you're training outside in the heat of the day. Whereas acclimation is artificial heat. So that could be in a heat chamber. That could be, you can make your own heated room, in your bathroom with the shower on, increase the humidity that way. Get your trainer in the bathroom. That's literally what we do sometimes with athletes. You could do post-training heat, so in a sauna or a hot tub or a spa. And so that's all kind of heat acclimation. So you want the best thermoreg adaptations come with more continuous or consecutive days. So like you want a volume of heat training, and generally 2 weeks is what we would say would be the minimum if you're doing a long distance event. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that the best thing to do is look at the race date of your event and then be like, okay, well, 2 weeks before that, I'm going to start, which often will coincide with a taper. That's not always because you have to remember that heat stress is adding another level of stress. And so often we will get athletes to start doing it a minimum of a month before. For something like Kona, we would say do rounds of heat acclimation or acclimatization. Do a couple blocks at least before your event, because the cool thing about heat is there's some element of thermal memory that your cells carry, and you can accumulate heat shock protein, which is going to make you more and more resilient in the heat. Another thing that's interesting is that you can do, say, 2 weeks of heat and then have a couple weeks off, and then say you come back to it and just do 3 to 5 days, and you actually can reacclimate considerably faster from that initial block than from when you go to redoing heat. So you don't need another whole 2 weeks. You're not going to lose all the adaptations. So that's a nice thing that we will play with when we're periodizing heat, is that concept of being able to reacclimate considerably quicker.
For men and women, so it's kind of the same for men and women. So start, like, say Ironman Hawaii is usually middle of October 15th, for example. So maybe we start beginning of September, start doing some heat protocols. So do you have a top heat protocols to do? I know I was looking at Dr. Stacy Sims has some information on her site, and you have some research studies that you run with Paul Larson and some other people. What are some heat protocols, specific ones that are you found, like with your Olympic athletes, elite athletes, that would be effective for endurance athletes?
Yeah, so it's always best to do as sport specific as you can. If you have that ability. So if you're able to train in a hot environment, whether it's outside or in a heat chamber, or you increase the heat in a room in your house. So probably cycling for an Ironman athlete would be the best place to start.
That's the longest.
Yeah. And you have a power meter, and so you've got that well, I guess you're running too, you have feedback, but it's just a bit more controlled. Because it's kind of nice to be able to see how you adapt. And you will notice at the start of a heat block that, say, it's an aerobic threshold continuous ride in the heat. That's where you start, really. And you see a decrease in power, an increase in heart rate. Your perceived exertion is up. You're uncomfortable. You feel hot. All these things, like and that causes your performance to go down. So it's good to have that kind of feedback at the beginning of a heat block and kind of have like maybe a set workout that you always continuously do in like each week.
Yeah.
To measure your progress of how you're tracking. And that will give you an indication of, do you need more heat or not? Because some people do need more heat than others. And as you were alluding to, like female athletes do need more heat than males to get the same adaptations.
So before I forget, so say you're a month out is your last longest ride. So say like I would do 6-hour bike ride for Ironman Hawaii. So would I go do that 6-hour bike ride, staying at my maffetone type of zone 2, low intensity heart rate, and just dress with more layers to be hot? Or, I'm not going to sit in the sauna, stationary bike. I know Ben Greenfield would do this in his sauna. Like if you were able to have a huge sauna, you put your bike in there on the trainer and ride a 2-hour bike ride on the trainer. But I think the easiest thing for people to do if they don't have a sauna would be would you overdress and go outside for your bike ride if it's not the 80-degree humid temperature? Yeah,
you can wear more clothes. Like if your skin, if it's September, you can still have some pretty warm days. Looks like it's pretty nice where you are.
Yeah, it just
so if you're putting on long sleeve pants and tops and you're covering your skin, you're then reducing your ability to cool from evaporative cooling because you don't have that wind flow on your skin. So you're going to get hotter for sure. And the whole thing about heat acclimation is that you want to intentionally increase your core temperature. The increase in your core temperature is what drives the adaptations. So that is the key thing. So if you have a way of measuring core temperature, like even the tympanic one, like it's not the gold standard, but it does give you an indication. Are you getting hot enough? So usually we say, you need to get to 38.5 as a minimum to see degrees Celsius. Sorry, I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit.
Double and add 30 is what we always did.
Okay. Yeah. So you need that to see your adaptations. And you also want to really be seeing an increase in your sweat rate too. So whatever stress you're doing, if you're not seeing an increase in your sweat rate and you're not seeing an increase in your core temperature, you're probably not getting hot enough if this is for people that are trying to create their own heat training. But yeah, like if you see that it's hot on one day, putting extra clothes on, going for a ride at that time, or maybe going for a run, because when you're running, you actually get hotter and you don't have the same kind of convective cooling from the wind. So that's another option.
Especially Ironman Hawaii, when you're doing the run, it's usually, on the way back on the Queen K, the pavement, when you come down from Hawaii is like super hot usually. And then when you hit the run, the clouds always come over that time of day, unless you're a pro athlete, they're done like early. But if you're doing 10, 12 hours, the run is cooler cloud wise, but it could be the hottest part of the day. So, cause you're running at 2 p.m. So it's, I think training for the run might be more important than the bike, because the bike, you do have a little bit of a breeze from biking that, cause you're moving, versus the run might be something to train more so for the heat.
Yeah. Yeah. Because that's when you're going to feel it the most at the end, at that time of the day. But yeah, so I guess like, getting in 60 to 90 minutes of heat training, if you're doing the training in the heat. And if you can't get that in consecutive days, like say you're banking on it being warmish, say, if it's 25 degrees and then you're adding on some layers and you're going out for a run at the warmest part of the day, that's going to give you an adaptation. But if it's, say, one day it's only 18 degrees and it's, cloudy, okay, it's not hot enough for me to go and wear clothes and get an increase in my core temperature. So, doing your normal training and then making sure your bathtub is at 40 degrees Celsius, and just having a thermometer and keeping it at that temperature, sitting in there up to your neck. If you can, like as much submersion as you can for half an hour, that right there is an example of a passive heat stim that is going to also drive those adaptations.
So go back to talking, how would you describe heat shock proteins? Because people probably hear this, maybe not know what it is, but with the whole sauna therapy and hormetic stressors, this acute stress of heat, for example, that we're talking about today, and we adapt to that heat stress. It's an acute type of stress, hormetic stressor, but explain the heat shock proteins, because I think that's important to understand what those are for people.
Yeah. Okay. So heat shock proteins are cell chaperones, and they basically have a protective effect towards the heat. So people that have a high level of heat shock proteins are going to be more resistant, more resilient in the heat. They're going to be able to better cope with the heat than people that have a low amount of heat shock protein. And interestingly, people that are, say, born in hotter climates, and have that ethnicity of being from a hotter climate, their phenotype shows that they already have a higher amount of heat shock protein. So that's interesting. I guess all of the things about thermoregulation are about survival and about your body's ability to protect itself from the heat. Because if you overheat as a human, the worst case scenario is that you die.
Yeah.
Right?
That's pretty bad.
So the heat shock proteins are there for a protective effect. And you can, if you're someone that's from a place like I am, from Canada, where, 6 to 8 months of the year we have snow, my heat shock protein is probably lower than a lot of people in New Zealand or Australia, where it's a lot warmer. But that is something that you can increase with sauna or hot tub, spa, heat acclimation. That can be changed for people, even for people that seem to really be resistant to adapting it initially. You keep doing the heat, and eventually you'll see a breakthrough, and you'll see that your body does adapt and is able to support yourself in the heat better.
So do you have a sauna protocol if people have a near, mid, far infrared type of or sauna at home that they could use? What would you suggest people do if they have a race in the hot weather? Do you have a protocol for that?
Yeah. So I guess it's always within like 5 to 15 minutes after a training session is the best time to do it. And that's because you already have an elevated core temperature and sweat rate.
Yeah.
And again, it's those two things that are kind of driving the adaptation. So you finish your session, you hop straight into the sauna. And again, this could be mirrored if someone does have a hot tub at home. It's a similar protocol that you would follow. Okay. And then you just have 30 minutes in the sauna or the hot tub. And 30 minutes initially could be too much for a lot of people. If you start feeling dizzy or lightheaded, that's your body's telling you to go out.
Yeah.
And
don't ignore the red flags and tough.
No,
That's what I always say. It's like, we are so driven, ambitious, AAA. Usually if you're a triathlete, endurance athlete and race a lot, that you just, I'm going to push through it. I'm tough. I can keep going. Then suddenly you're fainted in the sauna. No one can find where you are. And who knows, not good results.
That would be horrible. That would be very tragic. So I tell my athletes, like, if you're doing this on your own and not at a facility with the rest of your teammates and your coach and things like that, that you always need to message someone or tell someone what you're doing, because you could pass out in a sauna and that would not end well. So do be mindful. But typically you wouldn't be drinking fluids. Okay. So when we're doing heat acclimation, we're trying to stress the body. Mm-hmm. So you wouldn't drink, and say maybe the first day you are able to do 20 minutes in the sauna.
Without any liquids, you're saying?
Yeah, without any liquids.
Be dehydrated.
And you feel pretty uncomfortable by the end and you need to get out, and that's fine. You get out, you check, how much weight have you lost? And that gives you an indication of your sweat rate. And that's a good thing to measure. That's going to show adaptation as well as your sweat rate. So at the beginning.
Hold on though. What is that calculation for if you weigh yourself before and after, and how much you lost is equal to how much electrolytes you lost or sweat loss.
It's equal to fluid loss.
Yeah, fluid loss.
Yeah.
So you just go weigh, so you went in, you're 155 pounds, you came out, you're 150 pounds, you lost 5 pounds of fluid, but you don't. So isn't there a calculation after that? It used to be back in my day.
For determining what
your dehydration. Electrolyte level.
Yeah. Like to see what percentage dehydration you are.
Yeah.
Yeah. There is.
I'll have to look that up. I know there's a calculation because a client was just doing that. I'm like, okay, it was like 20, 30 years ago. I feel so old that we would do the Gatorade test of, how much sweat you lost, but how much that fluid loss of sweating 5 pounds is equal to how much you need to figure out your hydration per workout. And I'm sure it's different.
Typically, we would say to, in the couple hours after, to replace the fluid loss from a session to rehydrate. But in some really stressful or when we're trying to add more stress, we'd say delay the first hour after your heat stress of rehydrating, because that's going to cause further adaptations, and then measure yourself and then rehydrate. So there is a, when we're just like when you're training, you're trying to stress the body, and there's multiple different things you can manipulate to try and get more of an adaptation. And there's things that you can do, like cooling. If you're drinking a cold slushy in the sauna, that's going to attenuate your core temperature and even your sweat rate to some extent. So while you will feel better, that is defeating the purpose of what you're actually in there for. But
it'd be toughen up, but not do it excessive. Would you do this every other day? Because it seems like I want to get into too, the cold thermogenesis in heat cold therapy, that a lot of times people do it every day. And then I was thinking, all right, it's supposed to be hormetic stressors or acute dose of stress, but what if you're doing it every day and it becomes you don't respond as strongly? You're kind of, it's nothing, no big deal. It's more of a chronic stress ongoing that your body's not being stressed about it.
Yeah. So for getting, maximizing your thermoreg adaptations, we actually do know that doing, say, 5 days of a week, you're doing a 2-week block and you do 5 days each week. That's actually what you want to aim for, something like that, because you know that consecutive days of heat training has a greater effect than if you do infrequent days. So every second day or just 3 times a week. 3 times a week is still better than nothing. You're definitely going to see some, but it's going to take maybe a month to get the same adaptations. So if you can, what we normally try to do is consolidate it into a block, and we would target a moderate volume week when you're adding in this heat stress. You don't want to be adding it to a recovery week, because if you're actually trying to recover, you won't fully. And we don't want to add it to a high volume week, because you're just not going to be able to tolerate a high volume of training and the heat. So, kind of an easy to moderate week is what you're looking at. And you have to remember that the volume, even if it doesn't look like it on, say, training peaks, when you add the heat, the overall volume of stress is increased
with the heat.
Yeah. And so you need to factor in making sure your nutrition is good, your recovery strategies, that you're having good sleeps, that you're not sleeping in the heat. Because sleeping in the heat, if you're in a hot environment and your room temperature is too high, then you're not actually have good quality sleep. You want your room to be 18 to 20 degrees Celsius, really. So just things like that. And if you're feeling kind of iffy, your HRV is super low a few days and throat's a bit scratchy, or you just oh man, don't go in the heat. Yeah. Because if you are fighting something and you're having an immune response, the heat will make it worse. And so that's something you do have to be careful when you're doing heat training, because you can do too much, or if you're feeling unwell and you still go and push through and do a sauna session, like you could make yourself worse. So you do want to be carefully monitoring these things and using a bit of wisdom and common sense with it.
So like 1 to 2 week block and maybe cycle a week off, and then 2 weeks, would you do, like if you had 6 weeks before a big race and that's a hot weather race, would you do 2 weeks on, 1 week off, or how would you cycle it?
Yeah. So I would you can do it lots of different ways, but I would definitely, if you have 6 weeks, definitely start with 2 weeks of heat. You could have 1 to 2 weeks off and then add another week. And then as you are tapering in, maybe that's when you can kind of add in these little top up sessions to just keep all of your adaptations at their peak, rather than, because if you completely stop the heat 2 weeks before, you will have a decay in some of the adaptations. So, but by, every 3 days, say, having the sauna after a run or a bike, it's a lower type of stress, but it's going to still give you a heat stimulus that's going to help you retain your adaptations.
Okay. All right. So next,
you can play with it a lot of different ways depending on what your key strategies are around your actual training as well, because you don't want to forfeit all your key sessions and those important things.
Yeah.
You can, and whatever your travel circumstances are, you can do it lots of different ways. There's no right answer, but definitely doing the bulk of your heat stuff a ways out, like 6 to 8 weeks out, and then adding in little mini blocks and then little top up days is the best way to go.
Yeah, because you wouldn't want to interfere with your key, like speed work intervals or tempo race pace type of workouts, doing heat training during those sessions. It'd be more when you're doing the low heart rate, easier endurance based training, because your heart rate will be higher. Exactly.
And in saying that, after you've maybe done 1 week of heat training and you're doing that in more like easy to moderate sessions, it is worthwhile to target a few key sessions in the heat if you can, or tempo pace, race pace, because ultimately you do want to trial your cooling strategies for the heat. And if we're doing heat during a key session for athletes that I work with, we would add a little bit of slushy or a fan during some of the intervals. So they can maintain quality. They're still getting hot. You're definitely going to be getting hot enough, but it's good to kind of see how your body feels at like a race pace in the heat, because that is what you're going to be doing, and working out what are your strategies for cooling, and you're still ultimately going to get a benefit, but that would be something you'd bring in more the second half of a heat block.
Interesting. Okay. So with that, if you're doing swimming, for example, we just had a heat wave in San Diego for 2 weeks and the pool was super hot and it's hot outside or humid, and you're doing intervals, people were struggling staying hydrated. How would you do heat training, or, how would you properly hydrate or deal with the heat if you are a swimmer? And then I was talking to people today that do ultra distance swimming, like the 10-mile swims and open water channels and that. Do you have separate guidelines, or is it just the same to, I guess it's not the right question, but acclimate for the heat. But how do you, when you're in a race as swimming and then an Ironman or marathon in the heat, or a 50K trail run friends are doing this weekend, if it's hot out, how do you hydrate during that to stay? So you've done the heat training. We just talked about that. But now, like when you're doing the event and it's super hot, how do you hydrate? Do you work on that part?
Yeah, I guess the swimming one is interesting because it really comes down to the water temperature. And usually the water temperature is going to be low enough that you're going to be able to dissipate heat and not overheat in the water. There are some events where the water temperature is higher and there is a risk of overheating in that water. I haven't personally worked in many events where that is the situation. But typically, you're not going to generally not going to overheat in the water. And if there was really a risk of that, maybe there would be permission to have support boats, and you grab, a swig of slushy or something if you needed. But the only other thing that you would really be able to utilize is pre-cooling. So that's something we do when you can't cool during an event. The best, and especially for a long distance event, the best thing to do is pre-cooling. So that's usually in cold water. Immersion is the most effective, and you can also have slushy before as well. So having a form of internal cooling and external cooling before your event, and especially something like swimming, where there's not going to be really opportunities to stop and cool off.
Actually, my friend, that she's one of our swim coaches, she does all the channel swimmers, was a professional, and I've never looked at the sport. They do 10-mile or swim or however long it is, super long, more than my 2.4 miles that I thought was long. They stop every 30 minutes. And we're just talking about, how do you stay hydrated and get your calories in, a different topic, but it's just fascinating when you're swimming long distance. How do you get, your body electrolytes in, and you have to drink every 30 minutes and not, it seems weird when you're swimming, but we're just talking about preloading might be more effective for people swimming, or, in Ironman beforehand, how much we take in before, if it's like, 1,000 milligrams sodium, some potassium, magnesium, what the ratios might be to preload for a hot event.
Yeah. And sorry, I haven't worked with too many ultra swimming events.
Didn't think you did, but I just was so fascinated learning about that. I'm like, oh, that's crazy.
But no, that is really, it is really fascinating. And another interesting thing, that if you are just if you just are an open water swimmer, there's one of my colleagues actually did his PhD on trying to heat acclimate in hot water to see if you could adapt that way. And you don't adapt as well as cool. Other upright training in hot air conditions. So that was interesting finding. But the main things you would focus on are pre-cooling and your pre-nutrition strategy. And then if there is support in the water to be able to stop, then you have your race nutrition out there with you as well. Yeah.
That was just a little side question, because we were talking about it today. I'm like, that's really interesting, guys. So curious about how you do that. So with an endurance athlete, would you find it to heat train different for females versus men, and diving into how hormones like follicular phase versus a luteal phase for the female athletes, how do we need to adjust our heat training?
Yeah. So for when I'm looking at an athlete to see if they've adapted to the heat, a couple of the key things I'm looking at is, do we have a decrease in their core temperature at rest and during exercise? So that's kind of like your key adaptation. And it also comes with a decrease in heart rate for a given workload in the heat. And for female athletes, they take longer to see those adaptations occur than males. So males, you'll see if they're doing 5 to 7 days training in the heat, you'll see that they have a significant decrease in their core temperature and their heart rate within that time frame. So essentially, they'll be fairly good to go and compete in the heat. Okay. For females, it takes more like 10 to 14 days. So it's double the time, right? Yeah. So for with the sports that I work with, often they're not ultra distance, and sports won't have 2 weeks to go in a heat chamber. They have 1 week, and that's all they have. And it's like, we need to do the best we can with this. And so it's really making sure that you have those considerations in mind for, okay, well, if you do have females in this sport and you only have 1 week, what can we do to maximize their adaptations? And I can talk about that more in a second. But another thing that happens, another difference with females, is that we come to a higher core temperature for the onset of sweating to occur. So we don't start sweating as quickly. and we don't sweat as much. So if you look at that as a whole compared to males, females have a reduced cooling capacity compared to males. Okay. Mm-hmm. And we also see that females have a higher risk of exertional heat illness, which we're doing all this heat training for two things. One, maintain your performance in the heat, and two, avoid any heat injury or illness, right? Yeah. So those are, because females are, you could say our thermal rate capacity is slightly reduced compared to males to be able to perform in the heat, then we need to make sure, and it takes us longer to adapt. We really need to make sure that we're paying attention to these things, and we're giving our female athletes enough heat stimulus so that they can perform well and avoid heat injury. Another thing about the phases of the cycle you were mentioning. So for a natural cycling athlete, core temperature is going to be lower during the follicular phase, and then it goes up 0.2 to 0.5 degrees Celsius during the luteal phase. And so heat, you're already starting at a higher core temperature when you're in your luteal phase. And so then you add exercise on top of that, and then you add heat on top of that, and your ability to induce, and you also have an increase of oxidative stress and inflammation during that time. So you're more at risk of heat injury or reduced performance in the heat during that part of your cycle.
Because those are a lot of stressors piling up too. Different sources of excessive stress.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So, but in saying that, females can adapt really well to the heat. You just need a bit more heat stimulus, and they can perform just as well comparatively to men in the heat. But it's just that attention to what the differences are. So having longer durations of heat acclimation are important. For athletes that only have a short amount of time to acclimate for the heat, say we have some athletes here that are maybe not doing Kona, but they're doing other triathlons that are in hot environments that are like more Olympic distance or something. If you have a week, you can still get most adaptations, but if you really want to see that core temperature drop and you're a female, a strategy to use is preheating using like a primer before your heat session. So an example of this is, say you're in a hot environment and you're going to go out for a ride. To get your sweat rate going and your core temperature higher, you go in a sauna for 15 minutes before your heat ride. And that's there's a researcher in the UK, Dr. Jessica Mee, and she did some great work looking at this, as you can get the same adaptations that you'd see in a couple of weeks if you use a heat primer every single time during a shorter term block. So again, there's ways around, there's creative ways around this. Yeah, exactly. But you still need to account for that. And I've done that with a lot of the athletes I've worked with, where, ideally we would be doing 2 weeks of heat acclimation, but for whatever travel constraints or schedule constraints, we only have 1 week. So it's like, okay, ladies, in the sauna before you come see me in the heat chamber. And it's not nice to do that always, but they'll do it because they know they can feel the difference. Yeah. And we can see the numbers. It is really interesting.
So what numbers are you looking at? Like their heart rate and their speed, performance?
Yeah. Heart rate,
it stays
power,
up.
And their core temperature, their sweat rate, all those things, you'll see those respond more.
How are you tracking that while they exercise?
So if we're in a heat chamber, we'll usually use rectal temperature, which is like for research is like the gold standard of core temperature. But we can also look at tympanic temperature, or an easier way is also an ingestible pill. And if we get an athlete to take that, say 4 hours before a session, it will be further, far enough down the GI tract for us to get accurate core temperature.
Oh, interesting. I know we
So
just use
there are lots
Aura
of
Ring.
ways.
Aura
Yeah.
Ring just
Yeah.
does our nighttime temperature and stuff, but I was thinking, how do you do that when you're exercising? So someone has to stick a thermometer up your booty. Fun job to have for
Yeah. Yeah.
whoever gets that one. So how would you fit in cold thermogenesis? Does it fit in anywhere? Does it cause create any benefits to do hot cold therapy and finishing heat and then go to cold, or what type of
Yeah, so
benefits?
for the pure goal of adapting to the heat for performing in the heat, kind of avoid
Cooling.
cold therapy during that time, because you will have, potentially blunt some of the responses that we're after.
Yeah.
But like I said, there's a place for practicing your cooling strategies that you're going to use in a race setting. So that's where you could be bringing it in. That's the best place to be bringing in during a heat block. What I would say.
Yeah, I just wondered because I know so many people are into, hot cold showers. We suggest in the morning to start your day, and then a lot of people have the cold tubs now, or the Mazork, or the big ones, expensive ones, and then just ice baths we used to do back before all these things were created. But just doing intervals in the shower, hot, cold, hot, cold, hot, cold. But
like closer to your event, and in a taper where you're wanting to be freshening up, that's great. But when you're trying to get the brunt of your thermoreg adaptations, it's something we would advise against to an extent. So like if I've got athletes doing a post-training sauna, I would tell them don't go jump in a cold pool afterwards, because you are reducing the strain from the heat session.
Could you do 2 hours later? Have you found any research say how long to wait?
Yeah, a couple hours, your body would kind of come back to homeostasis, and that would be fine for. So
that was an example I did yesterday. I was telling you, I was saying this in my intro. I was trying to record a video on my YouTube channel that, all right, here, it's hot day, ended up being super humid, and I went for my longer run, hour and a half, 2 hours, not super long, but I found just the humidity or something. My heart rate was just I looked down my watch going, why is my heart rate feel like I'm going to pass out? It was so high. And so I'd okay, walk. And then I started put my heart rate on my screen on my Garmin watch, and it was walking at 134 heart rate. I'm like, what is going on? So I was trying to figure out, well, this is where, I was saying, looking for the female athlete, getting really specific. This should be deload recovery week. So I'm day 28 of my cycle, and then look at, okay, here's what happens when we are in that high hormone phase and your body temperature is already up before I started, and my heart rate's going to be higher, and the plasma volume is up to 8% higher. So I'm more dehydrated, and that causes my heart to have to work harder, which is why the heart rate's up. And so the same effort I did a week ago running is going to be way harder this time of my cycle. So it's just looking at that when you're mapping out your cycle that I do with my clients now, female athletes. You can look at, okay, if it's hot weather, what can we do to prepare the body for that heat stress workout? Is it eating more salty foods the day before, or drinking more my LMNT water before the workout? What would you think?
Yeah. So if you're in that situation and you're not training for an event in hot conditions right now, Debbie?
No, I'm just training for life.
You just want to have a good quality session.
Yeah, I just wanted to have a good long run and feel good. It's my happy place.
So doing having a cold shower beforehand, or hopping in a pool beforehand. You can have more salty food, so you are drinking more. Having something cool with you on the run, you were running, did you say? So you probably didn't have.
Yeah, I didn't bring anything.
You didn't have anything.
No.
Yeah, so maybe on a really hot day you do take something.
Yeah.
Right.
Bring water, electrolyte water.
Yeah. And if you make it, if you know that, this is a hot week in general, you could make kind of a slushy ahead of time, freeze it, and then when you're wanting, 3 hours before you take it out of the freezer, and you can just use that, because ingesting ice along your GI tract, it is like it draws heat from the body. And so it not only makes you feel better, but it can actually reduce your core temperature or reduce the rise in your core temperature. So it's pretty powerful. And anything like if you stop and you see, you stop for 1 minute during your run because you see a water fountain somewhere, like splash your face, your head, your neck, like you have lots of thermal receptors in your hands and
feet,
your feet,
right? What are those called? It's a skin on it's like your paws on the bottom of your feet and your hands. There's a name for it. I've heard on podcasts, but that's your cooling. So that's why if you sleep with your feet out of the bed, keeps you cooler.
Yeah. Putting your hands and feet in cold water, anything around your face and your head has a really, and in your mouth, all those things has a really powerful effect of changing how you feel. And can make a big difference. And then afterwards, kind of opposite of what we were just talking about, like, do your cold therapy after a run like that, for sure.
So there's almost two different scenarios. If you're training for a race that's in hot weather, like my friends are doing this crazy 50K trail run in Paris, Texas next weekend, we're helping with for her 50th birthday, super hot, humid, flat trail. And then there's people doing Ironman Hawaii. The other side of it, if you're just like me, training just because you like to train to keep fit and healthy, I enjoy my long runs. And if it's super hot out, how I can prepare for that. So doing cold beforehand to get my body temperature down, especially late luteal phase where it's already up higher to start with, and then doing cold afterwards and then drinking cold. And your cold slushies we should define, is that just like ice? Slushy melted ice, or is there anything in that?
If you have a blender or a magic bullet type thing, you just get some ice cubes and water, some kind of an electrolyte usually will make the consistency better than just ice and water. So having something in there will make a difference, and then just blend it up and that ice cone melting. Yeah, exactly. Like even some athletes I work with, like even literally just chewing on and swallowing ice. Yeah. The real powerful effect. Or like works. Maybe, maybe you need some like sport ice cream or something. But ingesting cold things, especially if it's in a solid form, is really effective.
I wonder if you could do that, your special needs bag up for the run course in Ironman, that you can have your own slushy with LMNT. I like unsweetened, the plain one without the stevia, and then mix that in with ice and water slushy and see if you can have it in a thermal container so it's not melted by the time you get it. But I know when I'm doing Ironman Hawaii, when I raced, I would do best every mile is an aid station, and I'd get a cup of ice and then cup of water, electrolyte mix when I needed it, and then just have that every mile, and just that ice and just ice cold water. It just was magic. And I'm just like cup of ice, cup of whatever.
And like in Tokyo, we saw all kinds of cooling strategies, but like we actually made some cooling wearables where you could put crushed ice or whole ice cubes in, and it would melt on the skin. And that was really effective around the neck, kind of on the chest, or even tie around your head. I heard one time as well, I can't remember the guy's name, but it was a Norwegian Ironman, and he said that he had latex gloves that he would pull out, and he would put ice inside the glove during the run and have the ice melting on his palm, and that made it a big difference for him. So again, those thermoreceptors on the hand. So there's all kinds of things, and the best thing to do for cooling strategies is to actually have multiple strategies, and be really trying them out beforehand. You don't want to
nothing new race day.
No, exactly.
Well, we always say to test and not guess. So test out your heat training and cold training beforehand as much as you can, and prepare for that day when you know it's coming up. So of course, I didn't think we would be able to talk about heat training the whole time, but we're already up at the last couple of minutes. So I know I'll have to add more in my outro for you, but we wanted to also add in women hormones and those that are on, what do you call it? Birth control pills, I guess, how that will alter it too when we're looking at mapping out the cycle. So I'll add that in separately. But anything else we want to add? I know you've got lots of research you've been involved in that we can share, the research studies. Any tips you wanted to throw in that we didn't cover?
I guess, yeah, just always measure some, like if you can pick a couple of things to measure your progress, that's going to give you a lot of insight and confidence, in your ability to adapt, and to see how ready you are for racing in the heat. And if you want to know more information about heat training and specifically for Kona, EndureIQ has a course just on the heat. It's called LDT 103, I believe. And anything about heat acclimation protocols is in there. And I did a module on that, and then like a practical applications one with Dan Plews about what to apply in a real world setting. So yeah, there's lots of more detailed information in that if people are interested. But yeah, I think that's it for now.
I know if people want to learn more, it's EndureIQ.com. And so you can look on their website to find those modules. Because I know I did it's called LDT, low carb athlete, but long distance triathlon training. So it could be any endurance sport. It doesn't have to be Ironman specifically, but that's Dan's specialty. But the 101 was, I think, more fueling. And then 102 is more training, and then the heat training. And then there's HRV one. So I still need to do the heat and the HRV training because I love that info, but those are good information. It's super affordable. I think I know I've done lots of trainings and this one's way less than others. So anyone can do it because it's not designed for coaches. It's just for people, athletes, just curious to learn more. So that's a great option. So good share on that one, but I'll try to get links from you on your research studies. And I think, people want to know more, we'll send them your way. But I think preparing ahead of time is essential when you're going to be training in a hot race. Get started 4 to 6 weeks before, but for sure 2 weeks is minimal.
Yes.
So
some heat is always better than nothing. So
exactly. Yeah. So such great information. I think it's a different topic, but something we need to address. And as I experienced yesterday, it was perfect timing for preparing for our podcast today. What happens when you are totally dehydrated and in the hot, humid weather, and you are a female with low estrogen and progesterone? So what happens? Not such good for performance. So thanks for all of your great tips and research studies. And thank you for following your passion and finding your niche to be in is great.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Low Carb Athlete Podcast. If you have any questions, feedback, or topic suggestions, let us know on Facebook or at debbiepotts.net. You can help us to continue to grow by leaving a review on iTunes. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.